This isn't a bad neighborhood as they claim it is.
The neighborhood's definitely changed. There's parts of it that used to look like Beirut. Now they're gorgeous.
It's really nice to have someone who hasn't been here in 5 years come back and go, wow.
All of the new housing that's going in now, I think the community is really improving.
It has been on the decline. It is getting a boost of new life.
I live on the Southside every day. Live on the Southside, come what may. I'm on the Southside every way. Come on down to this town on the Southside.
I want to go way back in the history. We had the old Pico Trail, which is Broad Street going out from the Central. When industry started getting developed here and they started looking for spaces, they went up Broad Street and up Elmwood Avenue. So the perception at one time was the Southside was a very nice place to live.
The Irish were clearly the largest ethnic group. There was a very strong, vibrant Jewish community, and there were small Ukrainian communities, some of the Ukrainians that got off those ships in the 1920s and settled up along Public Street. There was a little Italian community, likewise Italians that didn't venture all the way to Federal Hill or Silver Lake on the north end.
Broad Street was a very busy area. There was Temple Emmanuel, a very prestigious synagogue. And of course, Willard Avenue was the center of the stage. It was convenient to the grocery shopping, and yet it was convenient to the city. It could take a streetcar.
We had a lot of dime stores. We had shopping malls, grocery stores, laundromats.
It was a working class neighborhood. The blue collar unions and the union ideal was strong.
And politically, it was the powerful 10th Ward. Turned out a lot of people ran for office and won.
Lots of leadership came out of here, went to the school, all that sort of thing.
It was like the old-fashioned neighborhood. Everyone knew one another. They watched each other's children as people were going shopping and things like that.
Everything was centered around the parish place. This was the dances, this was the basketball league, this was the baseball teams. This was where people met each other and got married. They had the babies baptized here and made first communion. People went to the school or they went to Roger Williams.
I grew up down there, so it was gorgeous. It was all immigrants back then, but it was Jewish, Italian, Irish. Everybody took care of their property.
It was a very nice area to live in.
Slowly and eventually it went downhill.
Then around in the 60s, you had disinvestment in the neighborhood.
When they tore us out here on the west side down for redevelopment, they moved everybody from the east side, west side. They pushed us all into South Providence, this little reservation that's over around, really.
My mom came up here from down south. She's originally from Gulfport, Mississippi. In the 70s, she married her husband, and he was from Providence, South Providence, Wiggins Village, Aaron Littlejohn. I can remember my mother working at GE on Eddy Street and Almax. A lot of jewelry factories and different stuff back there. All of a sudden, things just started closing down, you know? People were looking for jobs. I'll say the business was probably moving out of Providence.
During those years, it did not have a very positive reputation. What was once a very prosperous community economically, where people lived here and worked here in factories that have since long gone.
In the 60s, as you've had the change in the neighborhood, as crime increased, had very negative connotations that stayed over for a long period of time.
We were coming out of school, and we saw a huge amount of kids from all over, I guess, the area. Dogs and police officers, and we were running down the streets trying to get out of the way. Now, the next day when we came out, along Prairie Avenue, we see broken windows and porches destroyed.
And the shopping center was one of the places I happened to be when blacks started tearing up everything inside. They were dragging white people out of cars if they passed through, beating them down, and then they pick up bricks, smash commercial business, windows, snatch and grab. And my friend Jose, his father, says, here's some guns. If they come over here, shoot them in the ass. My friend Jose, his father ran the store. So, of course, we were standing there, and I'm thinking, with my young and tender age, I hope they're not stupid enough to come over and challenge me with a gun in my hand.
It was mostly the shopping strip that was set on fire, and there was looting and robbing, and no one really knew who was responsible.
We didn't know if it was minorities, our own people, or people from the outside.
Blacks kept saying that whites were coming from different parts of the city to burn down their neighborhood. But then whites were saying that blacks were looting, robbing, and all. There was a sense that the police were not to be trusted.
The second day came, and it was the police in the shopping center. And they were, of course, defending the property. The day after that, there was an eerie calm, and people were crying, because of the realism that actually what happened.
Kids were hurt, families were displaced, businesses closed up and never came back. But it had an effect that showed that when you push people who are already so badly oppressed, that they push back after a while.
10 years ago, in terms of you had vacant boarding houses, large number of vacant lots. The impression of South Providence was that was a neighborhood you avoided.
A lot of the people that owned 3 families, they moved out, and then absentee landlords bought the places and they rented them to people who didn't own the houses, so they didn't care about it, and that's when it kind of started going downhill a little bit.
When you had more renters there than homeowners, the building started to deteriorate, and what happened is sometimes houses would be abandoned by the property owners because they would be behind on taxes, they weren't getting enough in rent.
From 1959 to 1980, in that transition period, the Broad Street station, which was then the busiest ladder company in the city, we responded to 348 building fires the first year that I was assigned there. These 3-story tenements became vacant, they couldn't be rented, they became expensive, and the people that owned them would burn them. And some people became very, very wealthy by burning large numbers of buildings and collecting the insurance money on them.
And if you took an aerial photograph of the South Side, anywhere from Point Street down to where 95 cuts by Roger and Spock, you would see lots of vacant land.
When they built Route 95, they knocked down a third of the houses.
Even go back a little farther, Rhode Island Hospital just eating up land like a monster.
When the hospital was built, they buffered themselves with parking lots to the community.
One of the parking lots was where I lived.
Where we were on Landau Street. It was a pretty nice street, actually. There were a lot of vacant houses in the area. They just bought up everything behind our house from one end to the other.
It went from 40 to 70 acres over probably a decade, almost all of that for surface parking, because it was cheaper to buy up the homes in the community than to build parking structures. I think it pretty much remains true to today that I think there's like a half parking structure on that campus, part of the new ER complex that Rhode Island Hospital just developed. But absent that, you just have acres and acres of unattractive landfill with cars.
It could be noisy at times. Sometimes it's like the most relaxing place because, as you can see, this is the only house left here. We don't have no neighbors, so we stay in contact with each other. Even with the previous owner, she was like 80 years old. She died in the house, actually. She wanted to die in her house. Who's ever in charge of getting the houses down from here, like the hospital people, being the only house here, they want to get rid of it. Like, it stands out. All they're going to do is make it into a parking lot, which makes no sense because that's all around us is parking lot.
Located at Thurber's and Prairie Avenues, they called the development Roger Williams Homes.
When it was first built, it didn't really have low-income people in it. It had war workers.
There were two so-called colored blocks, and the black families were segregated until the mid to late 1950s.
It was racially mixed. It was relatively well kept.
It was actually born in the Roger Williams housing development, and there were a few black families.
And with diversity as well, from Irish to African American. The Latinos started moving in as well, and so it was a thriving neighborhood.
And then when the rest of that project was opened up to integration, within a decade, right, the entire project became black.
And we had the phenomenon that's known around the country where we had white flight from the cities.
As more white people became part of the middle class, they would move and they weren't replaced with other white people. They were replaced with predominantly black people.
We had a management team that worked back in the early 60s when I was coming up. And then in the 70s, just all of a sudden started to fall apart.
As the white families moved out, so did the maintenance, so did the everything else. And it was a case of benign neglect.
They had a program which is called a community protection officer. We worked in the projects. There was a lot going on in Roger Williams. Of course, the drugs were prevalent there, prostitution, a little bit of everything there. You know, people didn't really care too much about taking care of the place. If maintenance didn't clean it up, it wasn't getting cleaned up.
People just started to move out. They started moving people out of the projects and throughout the rest of the city. It just broke it up, basically.
This was the former administration building and the recreational site of the Roger Williams home. It has been closed for the past 10 to 15 years.
There's a lot of stuff that's happened as a result of not having a development over here. Illegal dumping, drugs, and a whole bunch of other unsolicited activity.
The neighborhood went downhill along with the public housing development.
They demolished, I think, 7 of the buildings. and Roger Williams was deprogrammed from HUD in 1984. There's 2 existing buildings that for 40 families still living there. We want to bring that back online. We want to bring those people that moved, relocated, were forced out, we want to bring them back.
So we came up with some form of limited equity co-op. You don't own your unit. You own a share in a company.
This is something that is yours. If you tear it up, you're going to be tearing up something that is yours. You're not going to be tearing up nothing that's anybody else's. And if you can get the people to respect what is theirs first, then anything else that happens doesn't matter.
It gives me a great deal of pleasure today to endorse the proposal by the Family Housing Development Corporation to take several acres of unused public land that was formerly a public housing development and turn it into new affordable housing for the people of Providence.
One of the reasons that we've seen a decline in public housing is because tenants were never an active part in the development and the day-to-day running of their own living environment.
And I implore and urge anyone in the private sector to come forth and put something up there and say, let's see this project go.
Family Housing Development Corporation was formed in 1986 with its primary purpose being to develop affordable rental housing at this site. It is a 65-unit apartment and remaining true to many of the family-oriented townhouse-style design features that family housing for this site.
I grew up here in South Providence and Roger Williams projects, and I'm looking forward to having people as my neighbors again. And it's just great to have some activity going on over here. New people, new neighbors, some new kids coming over to the recreation center. We're just very pleased about the end product.
I used to live here at Roger Williams many years ago, so to see this turnaround is absolutely amazing. It is also time to reflect upon our lasting accomplishments, all made possible by a vision that took hold more than 25 years ago, when many of us still had no gray hairs.
So the city started gobbling up all our land. First they took the big field for recreation, then they took for the 2 elementary schools, then they took for the community center, then they took for the high schools. So the schools are nice, but we need housing. We're going to do something. So I called Jim, I said, Family Housing Development should sue us. Why don't you come in and sue us and say we have to develop that housing? And I said, we won't even fight it. We are dedicating today this development, Williams Woods. Williams is from Roger Williams, the founder of Providence. Woods is for Charlotte Woods. She's a longtime resident of Roger Williams' homes. She was a tenant activist and a housing activist. So I have her son, Joe Buchanan, come up and say a few words. Joe?
It's been many, many years. It's been over 20 years since Town Development Corporation took over. And I believe that this neighborhood is going to come back. But we did it. We fought, but we did it.
Está bueno. Está bueno, me gusta. Bueno, esto es tranquilo.